I think we're live. So yeah, the lesson
It's
of the day is if you've got, something that you need to plug in, make certain that it's plugged all the way in. Otherwise, you're just going to be chasing down rabbit holes that go nowhere in order to get things going. But
but now we're
anyway,
going.
yeah, we're going now. So welcome to everyone that's joining us. I'm Corey Singletary with the Citizens Utility Board, and I've got our executive director Tom Content with me here today,
Hi,
as usual.
hi everybody. Glad to be here and catch up on what's been going on,
Yeah, and if
what
you
we've
have
been
any
working on.
questions, for us, just throw them in the chat in the video. Um, so we were sitting around this week, and we're like, there's been a bunch of stuff going on. Um, not the least of which was a big press story early in the week from Alliant Energy. All right.
That's right. So Alliant came out and announced they're going to shut down their Columbia coal plant, which is uh, their biggest coal plant, and the one that they co-own with a couple other utilities, Madison Gas and Electric for one, and then Wisconsin Public Service out of Green Bay also buys or co-owns that. So it's that's a we've been watching these coal plant retirement announcements. We had Alliant again announced one in last year for the Edgewater plant in Sheboygan,
Mm-hmm.
and then in the fall, We Energies announced they're going to retire the South Oak Creek plant, um, which is the older Oak Creek. People get confused because they just opened the new one in Oak Creek in 2011, 2012, just about a decade ago now.
Mm-hmm.
But this would be the plant. The plant they're planning to shut down is the one that was built in the 50s and the 60s originally. But over the years, there was a lot of investment that kept those plants going through adding modern pollution controls and other upgrades to keep those going into the future. And I think if you take those three plants together, it's over a couple billion that was spent over the last 15 years on these plants.
Yeah. So I mean
And I think I can't hear you.
yeah, I was about to say I am.
You're
I have
all
too
right.
many
There you
window. I
are.
have too many windows on one laptop screen, and I'm trying to do too many things at once here.
You're
Um,
multitasking again, which is
yeah,
usually a great thing for CUB.
yeah, it's great. But yeah, so
Except when we can't hear you.
yeah, someone can't hear me. So to your point, there's we spent as utility customers, we spent a lot of money on these facilities that were meant to be running for decades longer than they're going to be. And certainly there are environmental benefits to them, to transitioning off of coal to something else, or even just retiring the coal plants. Um, and the utilities have presented the argument to the public and to the commission that this really is the right thing to do from a cost standpoint. That shutting the plants down will cost ratepayers less over the long run, as compared to sort of the business as usual, right? That's always the trick. It's not that shutting the plant down is going to cause my bills to go down. That's, I think, a common misconception is the utility goes out and says it'll save ratepayers money. Then it's like, well, why don't my bills go down? It's compared to if they just kept doing what they were doing, shutting it down would cost less. But we were scheduled to be paying for these things for in some cases another decade or more. Um, and so there's this huge issue of how does that bill get paid, right?
Well, that's right, and that's the challenge. I mean, the economics of coal have changed dramatically since Wisconsin utilities invested more in coal, essentially, and so the challenge is, the utilities are doing this kind of a hard left from continuing to invest in fossil fuels to now looking at the economics of solar and wind over the last decade. They've really started that shift, and there are a lot of solar applications in front of the PSC right now. And we can expect a lot more because of the fact the solar prices have dropped, 80 to 90% over the last 5 years. But the remaining costs that to link to these coal plants is kind of one of the key issues that we see here at CUB for keeping costs down in a clean energy transition. It's a big challenge.
Yeah, so I mean, not to get too wonky, but back in the old days when we would build plants there, or it feels like the old days. The standard used to be, in general, utility builds something, invest money, put steel in the ground for something. The old regulatory standard for whether or not the utility could recover those costs from their customers was the used and useful standard, right? Is it used by the utility, is it used and useful for the public convenience and necessity of the ratepayers, right? To provide utility service, whether that be electric, natural gas, water, or whatever the case might be. And so, we've been on the record in cases of saying, if you retire the plants and if they're essentially not there anymore, do you still satisfy that requirement? Because it was never meant to be a one and done. It's never meant to be, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever the case might be, the commission goes, yes, from where we're sitting right now, this looks like a good idea, but the utility has to utility has to make good choices over time. They have to operate their utility prudently, and they have to demonstrate that to the utility. Basically, every time they come in for a rate case or anything like that, they have to continue to demonstrate that, yes, we are being a prudent company with the customer's money, and this is the best way to spend that money going forward. And to a certain extent, it's great that they are looking at it and saying, well, the best way to spend the ratepayers' money is to not run these plants anymore. But by doing so, now you're taking it out of service, and part of the cost, I guess, that goes into those plants, you could think of, is the return. I mean, we talk about it in terms of return. Most people would think of it in terms of profit, right? And I mean, is that the biggest deal there? Is that the biggest issue in terms of trying to find a way forward? Is, they had been earning, let's say, 10% return on equity on a particular facility, but then they take it out of service. Should they continue to earn 10% return on equity effectively for a plant that doesn't exist anymore?
Yeah, and that's the question: is when another way, used and useful is the term of art that ends up in the commission arguments, and another way that I like to think about it is just is it being used to keep the lights on? And if it's not being used to keep the lights on or power our devices and power our businesses, what should the utilities be profiting, continue to be earning that kind of a return on something that isn't needed to keep the lights on, right? Mm-hmm. That's the crux of it. And clearly they're making a choice that they've had shareholder interest, customer interest, widespread interest, a lot of pressure from investors and from politicians and from environmental groups to push toward cleaner energy, and that's a transition that they want, that they're responding to a lot of interest to do that. But the challenge is, how it's going to cost and what it's going to cost customers over time.
So I think the biggest thing with that Columbia announcement is, as you mentioned, we already had the Edgewater announcement. We already had sort of South Oak Creek moving in that direction. And now you throw Columbia in the mix, and basically, I mean, there would still be other coal out there. You had mentioned the other Oak Creek, right? That right. Would be the other sort of remaining large-scale coal power plant that we typically think of that's owned by Wisconsin utilities. But with those three facilities, Edgewater, South Oak Creek, and Columbia, that's wiping out. Not only is it great, it's great from the standpoint of it's wiping out a bunch of coal generation, coal emissions, if that's something that you're concerned about. But at the same time, it's that unrecovered cost part that I think we had talked about it on the last live stream we had, is that's already a concern, and now we're piling, Columbia on top of everything else. So the bucket of these sort of stranded costs, which I know the utilities don't like the term stranded costs, but that the pile of stranded costs keeps getting bigger.
Right.
And
then
so,
that's it. And then there's all that would be left after that would be that Elm Road, the new Oak Creek plant, and then there's WPS still has the Wausau plant, that including a newer unit there plus an older unit. So where do we go from here? I mean, it seems like the first coal plant to shut down in the last few years was Pleasant Prairie, and that's where we had a rate settlement that made some progress on that issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and I would hope that coming out of that case and that sort of first deal we were able to make with the utility through that settlement process, where they essentially refinanced about a quarter of what was left through securitization and through the environmental trust financing, that it's my hope, at least, that sends a signal that that's sort of the minimum bar, right? Like, you got to do at least as good as that insofar as the type of rate relief you provide for customers from this stranded asset cost recovery. Paying for that second car loan on a car that you don't own anymore, I think, is the analogy we used the last time we talked.
Yeah.
And so I think, if I'm correct, we're definitely going to be seeing, Edgewater, in probably this year, in Alliance rate case for the following year would be, I think we would expect that. We Energies has been in the press saying that they want to not come in for a rate case. So whether or not we'll have to start contending with South Oak Creek might be, that discussion might be beginning as soon as this year. And, I think with the timing that Alliant announced for Columbia, it's possible that, we may have to start having that conversation now. So this year is, I think last week we talked that this year is looking crazy, potentially from a workload standpoint. But if we have to deal with, the treatment of all of this coal that's going out the door in 1 year, that's a lot.
Yeah, involving 4 of the 5 big utilities, right? Mm-hmm. If you think of all the co-owners of Columbia. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is an issue that's clearly been in not just going on in Wisconsin. I mean, you've had not to go too far down the wonkification rabbit hole, but on the securitization front, which is that refinancing, Wisconsin has this environmental trust financing law where basically what that allows you to do is refinance the cost of the pollution controls. And there's significant pollution controls and significant cost for those that are still on the books. And around the country, you're seeing other efforts at securitization. Some of them were actually go back to the deregulation days when utilities were deregulating, but more recently, you're seeing securitization in places like legislation in places like Colorado, and I testified last week in Minnesota, where they're considering a broader securitization bill, where if instead of just refinancing the cost of the pollution controls, you can actually refinance the whole thing to a lower rate, so that instead of that, and that's something that I know has been talked about, and the way it's actually been talked about in Wisconsin has been primarily through our Pleasant Prairie settlement, and then the case last year where they ended up refinancing the Pleasant Prairie. But as I pointed out to the Minnesota House of Representatives, you could only go so far in terms of generating savings, if you're limited by just refinancing the pollution control costs.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting, and folks that are interested in that should definitely, follow along in the news, and also follow along with some of some other YouTube videos we have, in terms of if you want to track what's going on the regulatory side, in terms of things that are filed before the commission and the arguments that are going to be made, or the discussions, I'll call them that, the regulatory discussions we will be having with our utility counterparts before the PSC, that would be, there's definitely a way that folks can kind of keep track of that. And interesting, so, switching gears a little bit, one thing you mentioned to me that I found was interesting, but, and part of me initially was like, oh, that's so silly. But it's probably worth bringing to people's attention is that you had heard that there was a round of utility scams going around again right now, talking about related to disconnections, even though that shouldn't really be an issue right now. But
right.
Talk about that.
Yeah, sure. No, it's frustrating that this continues to go on, and it seems like it does go in waves. And oftentimes it involves the electric and natural gas utilities, where scam artists will come in and basically call and threaten to disconnect you today or tomorrow if you don't pay X right away. Mm-hmm. And this time it was actually a water utility customer in Madison, and the Madison Water Utility put out the alert. And there's been a little bit of news coverage on this, and the Madison Water Utility, similar to Milwaukee where I live, those utilities never disconnect for non-payment. They just don't. And so somebody was calling customers of the Madison Water Utility saying, we're going to cut off your water service. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of the pandemic, when obviously we're washing our hands a lot, trying to keep as clean and as possible, as sanitary and as possible. And so that the fact is, whether it's the water utilities don't disconnect, but it's important to know that even the electric utilities, they don't use those means to disconnect. And people a lot of it is common sense, right? But then, and we put out a scams guide, which is available on our website, cubwy.org, that basically some simple steps to make sure you're staying safe and not getting victimized by these scams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it's unfortunate that people engage in this and try to con people out of money and stuff, but it's and it's probably an area that people don't think about. I mean, I guess that's the trick, right? If it's not a company that you interact with a lot, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, you get a communication saying, we're going to disconnect your service for something that is in your household critical, you may be so shocked and so panicked that you might just say, oh, okay, well, where's my checkbook or where's my credit card? Let me fix that. Without saying, okay, well, hey, hold on. Is this how it's supposed to work? Because I think the important thing for people to realize is, even in instances where a utility would or could disconnect a customer for non-payment, let's say, that there is a process laid out to try to ensure that the customer is notified before the disconnection is imminent, right?
Exactly.
There's a disconnection process where the utility has to reach out and notify. And really, at the end of the day, if they're going to disconnect you, someone is going to come to the house and make one final attempt to notify you that there's an issue that needs to be resolved before they disconnect you. So, it's I'm on part of the whole technical issues getting started today. I'm on a different computer, but if you just go to our website cubwy.org, and you can actually just do a search for scam, and that should bring up that resource. And we have it up there in English. Yep, it's on our resources page. The other thing is that we have it in Spanish as well, if that's helpful for folks that maybe work themselves. That's easier. But also, if you work with communities where Spanish language communications is better, then that's definitely something you're welcome to use too, to try to help folks out with those resources. But the part that made me laugh was, I think the thing you mentioned is, like, we're in the middle of a disconnection moratorium for a couple of things. Winter generally, right? Every winter, the utilities can't disconnect because it's winter, and you don't want people dying because they don't have utility service. And then on top of that is sort of the pandemic, where the commission sort of used the winter moratorium to not disconnect people because of economic hardship due to COVID.
Yeah, the disconnection's been in place for a while, right? Since
Yeah.
basically since early in the COVID crisis.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't been, utilities haven't been allowed to disconnect. But I was wondering, thinking aloud, I was wondering if, well, because it was in the news a lot
Mm-hmm.
when the commission was considering lifting the moratorium
Mm-hmm.
last summer and then last fall. But then it hasn't really been in the news as much because it morphed into the winter moratorium, which November to April. So it's just been happening, but it's just the moratorium has been happening, and that's why I was kind of surprised if people, maybe it hasn't been in the news enough, so people didn't realize that it was over or something like that. But in this case, it was a water utility customer, so it was interesting. But I know when I was reporting on this stuff, there would be cases where it would be, like a restaurant or a butcher shop, and they, right in the middle of their critical peak time, they got tons of customers, and it's not the owner who's working, and they get the call, and they're worried about all their stuff, all their fresh meat perishing in the case of a butcher shop, or all their food perishing, and so small businesses have been affected by this in the past too. And one of the things that some of these scammers are so sophisticated, and sometimes some police investigations have found that some offshore roots of some of these things, but they actually can, when the caller ID shows up, it's actually the caller ID of the 800 number of your local utility. So it can be very, really deceiving.
Mm-hmm.
Deceiving is the word. So, but people should, many people set and forget their utility bills, kind of have it on auto pay, but it's good to know what your balance is and how much you might be overdue, because when these folks call, they're just making it up, right? They're just like, oh, you owe $600 or something.
Mm-hmm. It's some exorbitant number that reflects, fees or charges or whatever, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
one of the things we recommend is,
mm-hmm.
that if you do get a call like this, you hang up, and if they call back, let it go to voicemail, and then save that message, and then you can pass that on that you can forward to either any of the above or all of the above, the utilities, your utility, the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, because they're always monitoring these scams, as well as police.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that along those same lines, that's usually what I do is, if I get a call, because these days everyone's getting calls about their car insurance, right? They're not the
My
car insurance,
warranty.
their car warranty. That's right.
That's right, my warranty.
And but I have in the past gotten calls about an account or something, and I'll be like, okay, that's interesting, thank you, and get off the phone in some way, and then I'll just call my service provider, my utility, or my television provider, or whatever the case might be, or log on online and be like, is this actually legit? It is very rare in the utility sphere where something is happening so fast that if you don't deal with it right now, that the world is going to come to an end. Usually you have some time to remedy things, and it's best to take the time to make certain that nothing bad happens.
Yeah, and we've talked about, these have been mainly phone scams right now, but there are other forms of these utility scams, including email scams, kind of like phishing scams,
Mm-hmm.
where it looks like the utility's email address, but if you look closely, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But then there actually have been some in-person scams, not quite as often, but that's been an issue around the country too. But where people will pose as a utility worker and come to your door and end up trying to say they're checking on your meter, a gas leak, and want to actually, steal from you. So it's just buyer beware, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody just some common sense, but also just kind of have to be on guard for these kinds of things. It is strange that we have to be on guard for them during a moratorium, but here we are.
Yeah. So hopefully it's we're getting into the middle of February. right, it's supposed to be super, super cold, so hopefully everyone's got their utility service squared away for the next couple of days with the Arctic blast we're going to be getting.
The big chill.
Yeah, that
Huge
doesn't
chill.
look like it's going to be fun at all. But
Yeah.
I know that we have to run to another call in a little bit. But was there anything else that you wanted to talk about today or anything like that?
Just wanted to, encourage people to put comments in the chat if they want topics, if they want to give us topics that they have questions about the utility service or the issues we talked about today, or other things going on with utilities and the energy transition, and and you can also email us, content@cubwi.org, staff@cubwi.org, singletary@cubwi.org. We are looking to interact with folks this way, and plan to be doing it regularly.
Yeah. And yeah, definitely reach out to us if you have questions. We try to answer every email that we get. We are a small shop and we get a lot of stuff. We're spread kind of thin, but we do. I'm right in the middle right now, talking with one of our utilities about an issue a customer is having, and trying to resolve that to their satisfaction, or at least so they know what's going on. It is the case that it is unfortunate. There are a lot of instances where we end up having to be the bearer of bad news of, something kind of seems like maybe it stinks, but there's nothing legally that can be done in terms of the utility hasn't done anything wrong, even though it is unfortunate, and oftentimes we agree. It's like, well, that kind of sucks, but
yeah, it's a decision we may have tried to get the commission to go with a different outcome down in the past, in a past case that now we're kind of living with, and hope to fight some of those issues again. But
yeah, that's always the case. Is it's even if you see in the press or you read in testimony that CUB has taken a particular position. We don't always win. The utilities don't always win. So just because we fought against something in a case doesn't mean that it didn't happen, which is unfortunate. But yeah, we'll definitely drop comments in the videos here, or just reach out to us directly, and we'll see. We'll try to help you any way we can. So with that, maybe I wish you a good weekend, Tom.
You too, and we'll look forward to doing this again. Maybe if the time fits, we'll try it again next week. Make it this a Friday thing.
Yeah, that might work. We can, it's the end of the week. It's Friday. Maybe we can just sit down with some beers and just wrap up the week and talk about what happened.
Pretend we're out on the terrace.
Oh God, I'm looking out the window right now, and that is grim out there. All right.
Yeah, well, it's toasty in the basement here, but I'm still wearing wool, so it's going to be that kind of a weekend. So hope everybody stays warm out there.
Okay.
And safe.
All right, cool. Talk to you later, Tom.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.